after they got their notification. But it's certainly starting off the week with the the very low profile matter of how we're dealing with Supreme Court opinions and orders that are just changing the way that the Trump administration is operating on the ground across the country in its mass deportation raid efforts. And so to get started, we have the benefit of the by happenstance creator of the Kavanaugh stop terminology, Professor Anil Kalhan, who is at Drexel University, professor of law, and we have been pretty much regular interaction on social media over the years, as we have both been delving into various areas of the law that some of which we were expecting to jump into, some of which we probably weren't at various times. And yet here we are. And I obviously, when the Supreme Court's order came down on September 8th, was immediately almost flummoxed by some of the contents within within Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence, and I wrote about it that day, and have now written about it twice since. And you obviously also jumped into the discussion, and I guess sort of for starting, like, what was it that drew you to this order when it came down?
Yeah, so I think my first of all, thanks for having me join you to talk about this. The When the order came down, I think I had a very similar reaction to a lot of people. Let's just, there was a lot then that folks were writing about the case. This was in early September. Um, the lower court litigation all happened obviously over the summer. And I've been following it as somebody who teaches and writes about immigration law, but there's actually a lot to follow these days in the field. So it's been very much a moving target in terms of thinking about sort of how deeply to pay attention to the various things that are happening. Um, and there's obviously also just been a flood of shadow docket, emergency docket, uh, what are we calling it these days? Interim docket
Interim
litigation,
docket,
interim
Kavanaugh wants
docket,
us
right?
to talk about
Yeah,
that.
so right, we've got to make sure that we don't offend him. But the the and that has been, I've had the same reactions that I think a lot of critics have had in terms of just the rule of law concerns, about sort of the consequential nature of some of these decisions that have been issued, a decent number of them in the immigration context, but certainly by no means exclusively. Um, and the lack of explanation, all the things that many observers have reacted to. So I had that reaction again, right? I mean, in some ways, that's, I can predict the reaction that I'm going to have, as all of us probably can, when you see, okay, this is the kind of adjudication that's taking place, right? Here you have a district court judge issuing a very detailed, fact-based order, um, prohibiting, in very careful ways, actually, defining what can the government do and what it can't do.
Yeah,
In a
and
length.
just, I mean, I've talked about it at length, but just like to lay out, it was specifically that they may not rely solely on any combination of four factors: apparent
Right.
race or ethnicity, speaking Spanish or speaking English with an accent, presence at a particular location, e.g., bus stop, car wash, tow yard, day laborer pickup site, agricultural site, etc., or the type of work one does.
Right.
And that was the extent of the what she had referred to as the Fourth Amendment TRO.
Right. Right. And so that decision was made in a TRO posture, but based on factual findings and sort of consideration of evidence in some detail. The Ninth Circuit, on an expedited basis, also issued a very detailed opinion. Probably made, their summer, those judges, it's like the pace of that litigation. They had to work hard probably to sort of get an opinion out. It was also quite lengthy and detailed. And then the Supreme Court sort of just drops a paragraph saying, when the equities with two lower court opinions going against the government, you would think, in fact, that sort of would make a higher hurdle for the government to overturn to overcome, then just issues this paragraph. And a lot of people had written about it. Sherrilyn Ifill had written about it. Madiba Deni, Jennifer Chacon. There's the whole bunch of people had written stuff, and I think a lot of people then were talking about it. And the thing that was most striking, and in the obviously Justice Kavanaugh wrote this concurring opinion, right? Which nobody else joined, right? And Madiba said, well, Madiba Deni in her piece said, well, no other just joined it. Maybe they reasoned it was better to remain silent and be thought a racist fool than to speak as Kavanaugh did and remove all doubt, right? So it was striking. He's chosen to write this opinion, and with a lot of just no sort of factual citation in a lot of places. This very sort of blithe and cavalier um, uh, discussion about and if an individual is legally present, the stop will be brief and it's a minor inconvenience. Uh, and so for several weeks, I had the same reaction that a lot of folks had, which is, and I was just sort of a consumer, and then there was a lot of discussion on Blue Sky and other parts social media about Justice Kavanaugh himself in this context. Um,
And it
and
was,
then
it was, I mean, there was, it was just like two words in it, but I think that, or I guess altogether five words, but I think it did sort of stick in people's craw, the
yeah,
not to mention common sense.
right,
That it was totally like he said, under this court's precedents, not to mention common sense. Those
right,
circumstances taken together can constitute at least reasonable suspicion of illegal presence in the United States. Like, putting aside whether or not it was true under the court's precedents, which many people have written since, like
yeah,
why he was wrong on that front, it was this totally unnecessary like duh statement that he added into it that I think for those of us who have been encouraging the justices to write when they are making decisions on the shadow docket, it was like, what are you doing here? Like,
yeah, yeah. This is not quite what I think folks were encouraging them to do, right? And it's sort of that. I think also that invocation was I mean, in some sense, it's entirely consistent with the way in which the court has approached immigration policing cases. And Jennifer Chacon wrote a great piece about this, sort of for a long time. But it also has a particular way of uh, just running into the reality that many people experience, and that in this day and age many people can see, because so many then in the days and weeks after that decision, so there's so many examples of, I mean, there were examples in the case itself, right, of, well, if
right.
you actually read the record, and Justice Sotomayor helpfully pointed out some of the examples, your common sense is not actually consistent with the record in this case. but it's also not consistent with with the reality that people were able to observe in videos and just other instances, other documented incidents. Whether that's with respect to the brief and minor inconvenience, or even with respect to the standing question that he tried to sort of assimilate the lion's notion that, well, the likelihood of your being subjected to the chokehold again is not high enough. Well, in fact, actually, the district court made findings about that. And in a number of these examples, there are people who have, in fact, been subjected to these practices more than once.
And so a little less than 2 weeks after, or a little more than 2 weeks after that decision comes down, there is sort of a follow-on lawsuit that was filed in DC.
Hmm.
And Aaron Reichlin Melnick, who is great immigration expert, who we all rely on for his expertise at the American Immigration Council, he posts a fact of this from this new lawsuit about the lead plaintiff, who is a Latino man, has been here for 24 years, grabbed off the street by federal agents who didn't even ask about his status, detained overnight, and only released once a supervisor realized he had been illegally arrested, which then leads to your quote repost. And you say what we might refer to as a Kavanaugh stop. What a 9:08 a.m. Post that's now been liked 5.6 thousand times, reposted 1.6 thousand times, and Kavanaugh stop is now a matter of discussion across the media. What were you thinking when you wrote that?
Yeah, it's funny because I was mentioning to um, Leah Littman, she's like, you spend dozens and dozens of hours on law review articles, and sometimes picking your words very carefully, going back and forth with um, editors and colleagues about it, and then this thing has now been, of course, invoked and referenced more than anything I've written in my entire career, probably. What was I thinking? I mean, I think that I wish I could say that I, had given it the same amount of careful thought that I would give to, the scholarly work that I do. And I didn't. I just sort of, it was a Saturday morning, and I saw this, and I had been reading and thinking about sort of with the frustration, the sort of frustration that is cumulative for many of us about the role that the Supreme Court is playing, and I just sort of thought that's it wasn't like the product of enormous thought. Like, I can tell you what lies behind it, sort of, reconstructing the thought process. I mean, one of the things that is just sort of so frustrating about the discourse around the Supreme Court sometimes, if you're not a lawyer, this is sometimes more true, is that um, the part of what the use of the shadow docket, what it does is it sort of has a way of evading accountability, right? Because of course they're not in
Mhm.
fact laying out their reasons, um, and that then sort of masks the ways in which the court and the judiciary generally are co-creators of what other branches do. Right. So, I mean, I think that that's there's many conversations to be had, of course, about the immigration enforcement practices themselves. But that actually wasn't what I was directing this to. I was
Right.
directing this to the Supreme Court itself and the concerns about judicial accountability in a situation where this is the rare example, maybe, where in fact, not the only example, obviously, but one of the rare examples where one of the justices chooses to actually say something is like, okay, well, you're co-creating what we all are experiencing. You're doing so in a way
Mhm.
that is in fact at odds with reality. You should own it. And in some ways, like, he having spoken, it's there's obviously a majority on the court that is no less responsible in some ways, right? But okay, you want to speak to this, and you also have accountability, right? And these are Article 3 judges who are, serve for life tenure with good behavior. That doesn't mean that we can't actually have conversations about judicial accountability in over any number of ways.
No, and
Um,
I think that that's definitely something. I mean, that's what spoke to me about it. That's, I mean, I just think that, I mean, we have spent so much time talking about the shadow docket, talking about, and it seemed like it really hit perfectly at that, like, how do you actually apply accountability? And this was an example that, I mean, we talk about sometimes, like, all of the aftermath with, like, the Coach Kennedy case and all this stuff
right.
about, like, oh, you make up fact patterns and create a reality that enabled you to have a decision, find standing, whatever legal thing it is. But this was a perfect scenario in which it, because it was on the shadow docket, there were immediate effects. It did apply to other cases. It was right out there, and you were able to take his assertion of reality, and day by day show what that looks like, as opposed to the video that people are showing, the arrests that journalists are writing about, and it did become very easily something that somebody who hasn't read a 45-page law review article about immigration enforcement policies can understand what is being talked about here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, that weekend, it was my birthday weekend, so I was a
Mm.
little a little behind the curve catching it, and when I started seeing it, I was starting to see people already talking about it. And I mean, what was that? I mean, you already said it's sort of like, oh, this is the thing people are latching on to. I mean, how what have you been paying attention to in the way that people have responded to this?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few things that are striking to me. Um, the first one is one that you're describing. I mean, the power of this, I think, is just sort of the making it a sort of kind of common sense. It's sort of like a counter common sense in some ways that sort
Mhm,
of, I've been struck by the number of people, just who I've seen, um, using this phrase, probably not knowing sort of where and how it came to them, which is great, actually. Like that's,
right.
it's not necessarily the way, academics or legal academics are sort of acculturated to think about things, but it's like that's great, and sort of and non-lawyers, right? Is actually sort of to
Mhm,
create a sort of kind of sense, as I was saying before, that the judiciary is a co-creator of the various practices that people are reacting to. The moment that was most striking to me, I mean, there was like explainers in mainstream media outlets, which was striking. The very early on, Chris Hayes did a segment um, on his show. But the moment that was striking to me, and probably the one that sort of it was actually very recently, is when there was the Senate Judiciary Democrats use the phrase, because one of the things that I think has been a source of frustration, at least my perception is a source of frustration for a number of people who are sort of who've been pushing for judicial accountability or court reform in various ways over a number of years, is that there hasn't been much of an appetite, never mind for any prescriptions, but to
mhm,
actually sort of have a discussion um, that is about that in fact is focusing attention on the judiciary. And then the Senate Judiciary Democrats started to use this phrase, I think last week or maybe the week before. Um, that was striking. I mean, to me, I think it's great. I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see, not necessarily that phrase necessarily. I don't know. That's not as important as sort of, in fact, sort of having um, more of a political mainstream political elite conversation about judicial ownership
Mhm.
or co-ownership of the various things that are happening. Because, the I think that there has been certainly some appetite to criticize the Trump administration in all kinds of ways and to go to court to challenge them. I've seen a little bit less from Democratic elected officials about, well, what happens when you lose those lawsuits,
Right.
right? Is it, do you just throw up your hands and give up, or do you in fact actually have some kind of ongoing um, conversation in which your political program includes both the um, elected officials in, executive and congressional officials who are responsible for these actions, as well as the judicial actors who are also part and parcel of those actions.
And that
So,
was, I mean, when I um was watching sort of how this was going and how people were addressing it. Like I did eventually, like I saw like on the sort of the my one of my old editors know I love anniversaries and stuff. So 1 month after the decision came out, and when it did feel like it was still being discussed, like I did use one of the examples, Frank Miranda in Portland, who was arrested and struck from behind, and was born in California, was said he didn't know what they were talking about when they said he had overstayed, um, and sent that inquiry to Justice Kavanaugh and said, like, "Do you have any comment on this? And does it make you rethink what you wrote?" And then I said, like, "Are you aware that people are referring to these as Kavanaugh stops?" I know that it got to Chambers and that he hasn't responded. I then posted a second one when Maria Greeley, who was the Chicago worker who
mhm.
was told that she didn't look like a Greeley when she was detained, and literally said she carries papers with her because she's afraid of the fact that people are going to say essentially that. Asked about that, and then of course 2 days later, ProPublica came out with this extensive report about the more than 100, some of them were arrests as a part of enforcement, but that there had been at least 50 U.S. citizens arrested by ICE for immigration related detentions. And and asked about that. And I think that that idea of like that you can take when questions arise about what the justices have done, there's no reason why, as a journalist, I should um treat what he has said as what he has written as sacrosanct
Right.
and not able to be questioned. He doesn't need to answer, but that doesn't make the question illegitimate.
No, not at all. And I think that it's interesting. I mean, how you think about accountability when somebody has life tenure. I mean, it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
Um, but life tenure doesn't mean, I feel very strongly about this, that judicial independence is kind of, it's not maximal autonomy. We've seen in other countries that I have studied, where the sort of discourse around judicial independence becomes just sort of like judicial impunity,
Mhm.
and that cannot be good, in any more or less than is true for any other public
Right.
official. Um, and it might be that you send these questions and you don't get answers right away, but there's a longer discourse to have. I mean, I think there's a
Right.
similar kind of set of maybe even a more intense set of questions about someone like Emile Bove, right? Who's
Oh.
now, age 43 or whatever, however old he is, and is, likely to be on the Third Circuit for a long time, but, with a significant cloud, and you know, how do we think about how to engage with the questions of accountability. I think that's, there's lots of different versions of that challenge, and I think we just need to all be creative about thinking about ways to um, engage that question, right? Because I think it's like, that's certainly not consistent with the founding to think that like, well, there's, um, public power is sort of exercised with impunity, right? Just
Mhm.
this happens to be judges, but that doesn't mean
Right.
that that's anything goes. I mean,
Um,
the other thing that I think is interesting, just before
yeah.
it slips my mind, is that this particular case, I think about it as well in the context of the sort of broader conflict between uh, district court judges and the higher judiciary, but
Mhm.
especially intensely the Supreme Court. And the ways in which, this is a particularly vivid example of a disjunction between careful, detailed fact finding by a district court judge who is engaged in, the what the sort of truth seeking function of the federal judiciary is. Um, and it's not the only one, right, in which then the Supreme Court just sort of casts that aside. And I think about this in that context as well. I mean, in some ways, I heard, I think Steve Laddick and Will Bode having a conversation about the shadow docket several weeks ago. And one of the things that Steve was saying is that, it seems like the Supreme Court kind of wants to be, or at least certainly Kavanaugh does, wants to be kind of like a nationwide district court, but they're not
Yeah, I
actually
mean,
equipped to
we've
do it.
seen that from
Yeah,
Alito in the
yeah,
past,
yeah,
definitely as well.
yeah. But they're
Yes.
not equipped to do it. And
Mhm.
that's sort of like and they're not equipped to do it well. So in some ways, this kind of opinion just goes to show that, right? It's just so easily, refuted in so many ways, right? Or picked apart in so many ways.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and it's from both sides. You've got the not respecting district court fact findings on the one side, and you've got this like we're going to just dig into and figure out what facts we think are important from the Supreme Court level, regardless of what the district court judges thought were the important ones.
and citing nothing
Right.
throughout except, well, it's just common sense. I mean,
Yeah.
pretty shoddy.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think there is also that reality that for a lot of us, this felt like it was such a slipshod opinion that it really did deserve that pushback that um when we like, as many of us have said when we asked for justices to write on the shadow docket, we wanted good.
Right.
um is there like as you're looking, I know that this isn't your main area of focus. What 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 things? What do you wish people were paying attention to that they're not?
Well, I think that, one of the other things that's heartening about this case is that it is bringing immigration issues a little bit more to the fore beyond the people who are sort of regularly paying attention to immigration law questions and immigration enforcement questions. And it's, I've worked on immigration law for 20 plus years, and it's been a high profile issue at various points throughout that time. But that doesn't mean it necessarily enters into the consciousness of in a wide way. And it still probably isn't. Um, but the reaction to this case suggests to me that it is increasingly so. And I think the reaction to some of the various things that are happening around the country also is suggesting that. And to me, the indicator that, the question then is, will that then migrate into other elites, the political elites,
Mhm.
other economic and social elites, and certainly, prestige media. Does it affect how they are in fact prioritizing coverage and thinking about coverage of these issues? I mean, there's been great reporting. Obviously, a lot of it's coming from independent journalists and local journalists, and maybe that's just to be expected in some ways.
And I do think that, I mean, watching the way that I mean, it is because it is these people's communities, it is these people's neighbors, it is, I mean, that I think is sort of it's the reverse of why Trump was able to do this so well during the campaign in his favor, because then it was about nobody in particular. It
Right.
was the amorphous them.
Right.
But now it is Maria who worked down the street from me. Now it is Frank who is in my community, and that's much harder for people. I mean, there was that New York Times story about the grandmother who
Right.
was had been in town for 20 years. It just it is a far different picture, and then you have something like this coming out of Kavanaugh that doesn't match with what people are seeing and hearing from their communities on the ground.
Right. And the comfort zone for, the national elites, I think, the elite level national elected officials, national media is to engage these issues at a much more abstract level. And I don't say that as a pejorative about them necessarily. It's just sort of like, that's the level at which they're actually mostly functioning and operating. Um, and it's just what's been so striking to me is that the local reporting, the citizen documentation of all kinds is really part of what is challenging that. And has been so valuable, right? It puts such a finer point on how the sort of erosion of local news over the last over many decades, and what a cost
Yeah.
that has.
No, yeah, I mean, when that's I mean, I ended my piece on Sunday with the reporting from a suburb of Chicago outside of a Walmart, and a woman being harassed and asked where she was born.
Yeah.
It is, people need to keep doing that. Um, is there, before I let you go, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you think we should?
I don't think so. I'll look forward to hearing it whether when Justice Kavanaugh's chambers gets back to you.
Exactly. I'm sure it will be soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time,
Thank
and
you.
thank you to everybody who joined. As usual, a copy of this will be posted with a transcript later. Thanks.